You're listening to the Sisters-in-Laws podcast, a faith-based podcast that spotlights Black women who replace silence with storytelling around pregnancy and infant loss and infertility. Black women experience miscarriage and stillbirth 4 to 5 times more likely than white women, according to the NIH and CDC. Whether you've experienced a miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, are trying to conceive, or have an infertility diagnosis, you will learn about resources and strategies to heal, gain clarity, peace, hope, and find an empowering path forward after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee, and you will hear me interview sisters-in-laws who have healed from such a painful and traumatic experience by sharing their testimonies and stories to inspire and help others turn their pain into their purpose. Now let's get started. All right. Welcome to Surviving Pregnancy Loss. I'm your host, Erica McAfee, and I'm here today with Regina Jackson. Welcome, Regina.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I would love for you to share with our viewers a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So I am a 4th grade teacher, and I have a little doggy that won't leave me alone. I teach math and science, and I live in North Carolina. I also just graduated from a master's program, so that's exciting.
Yay, congratulations.
Yeah.
Awesome. So take us back on your journey to motherhood and share with us your lost story.
I'll start by giving a little bit of history. So I do have sickle cell. So ever since I was younger, I knew that having sickle cell, when it comes to having kids, there could be complications. There could be the chance that I wouldn't be able to have kids or to withstand the pregnancy due to my blood or whatever the case is. So when I found out that I was actually pregnant, it was shocking. And it was actually very exciting and ironic, because prior to that, I had actually talked to my doctor maybe 2 weeks ago about the possibility of having a child. So to find out I was pregnant 2 weeks after that was just mind-blowing, because it was almost as if it was planned, but it wasn't. So I found out when I went to the hospital in November. So this was before the whole COVID-19 outbreak became so televised. And I thought that I had pneumonia because I had this terrible cold. So they wanted me to do an x-ray. And before I could do it, of course, they give you the pregnancy test. So the nurse comes back in and she literally just said to me, "We're going to have to shield your stomach." So I'm like, shield my stomach for what? So that's when she told me that I was pregnant. And my reaction was, well, where am I going to put it? I was just I don't know why that was the first thing I thought of. But that was my reaction to it. So after that, I went and told my boyfriend, who I'm still with now, his name is Raheem, and he was excited. And I honestly didn't know who else to tell, so I didn't really tell anyone. I went back to work and I was okay. This happened on November the 23rd. So this is right around Thanksgiving time. And right before we go to Thanksgiving break, we have this big STEM celebration for the kids at my school. So on this day, we have all the students go from room to room and we do activities with them. And I just remember that day feeling so tired and drained. And I was just I just felt really weird. So when I went home, I went to sleep, and that was on like a Thursday. And I remember I slept for like 2 days and I woke up and I was still tired. It was just a very weird feeling. So after that, about a week passed and we were at his cousin's house and I started having this light spotting. And I wasn't exactly sure what it was, so I called my OBGYN. And they basically said that it's normal. It could be implantation bleeding, that type of thing. But I started to get these really bad cramps. And I happened to actually keep track of my period on an app. So this was happening around when my next period would have happened. So I was really confused. I'm like, can you get your period when you're pregnant? So I'm Googling, trying to figure out all these different things. So eventually I called the nurse back because it was bad to the point where I couldn't even stand up straight. And she advised me to go to the women's hospital. She didn't want me to go to the emergency room. So I went there and I had a doula look at me, and she thought that she saw a subchorionic hemorrhage. So she went and talked to another doctor, and the doctor said that she didn't think that I had one. She thought it was just bleeding, that I need to rest, that type of thing. So that was on December 22nd when I saw her there. Around the 26th, I ended up having to go back to the emergency room because I was still bleeding and still cramping. And that was about 4 days later, and it was getting heavier to the point where I had to keep changing my pad. So I went to a different hospital, and I ended up having to wait a long time. It was probably like 4 or 5 hours before I was able to get seen. And they checked the heartbeat. They did an ultrasound, and everything looked fine. And no one could tell me why I was bleeding so much or what exactly was going on. They just told me to take it easy. And that was pretty much the same thing they said last time. So I ended up going home and just resting. And it worked out because we were on winter break, so I didn't really have much to do. And then about 4 days after that, it was December 30th. And I had woke up. It was a pretty normal day. I had talked to my grandma, which she knew that I was pregnant. And it was just so ironic that I was telling her that I didn't feel well. I was really tired. And I was going to take a nap. So she was like, well, you need to make sure that you're sitting down because you don't want to have a miscarriage. And for some reason, that just stuck in my head because I was like, I didn't even think this whole time that was a possibility. So, of course, I just kind of played it off. I'm like, okay, grandma, thinking, oh, she's just old, just saying whatever. So I hung up with her. And the way my last apartment was, we had like a patio door, like a slide one. And I remember a bird flying into the window and just dropping. And I was like, this is just really weird. It was just so much going on that morning. So I went to lay on the couch. And about 20 minutes after that, I started getting these really bad cramps. And they were coming like maybe 15 minutes apart. And it was to the point where when it did come, I couldn't even inhale. It was like the breath was taken out of me. So I remember getting up and going to get an ibuprofen. So I thought, well, it's just cramps. I'll just take that. And I went to take it and I like immediately threw up. So at this point, I can't stand up straight. I'm sweating. I was like sweating so much. I thought I had fever. I tried to turn the air conditioning up and nothing was helping at all. So about 20 minutes passed after that and the cramps started getting really bad to the point where I couldn't even stand. I was like on the floor, on my hands and my knees. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, am I dying? Like that, it just felt that bad. It was so excruciating. So that day I had switched cars with my boyfriend. He took my car to work. So I had his car and I drove myself to the emergency room. And I remember I couldn't even sit in the car because it just hurt so bad just to sit down. And I got to the hospital and the way the hospital is, they have like a cul-de-sac in the front. So I pulled the car up. And I couldn't even park it. I just didn't have the energy to find a parking space. So I got out the car and just went inside immediately. And I remember the security guard asked me to park the car, and I just gave him the keys. I don't even remember what he said, but I guess he parked it, I assume. So I go inside. I go to the triage nurse, and I tell her, at this point, I'm 11 weeks pregnant, and I'm bleeding and cramping to the point where I can't stand up straight or sit down. It's just really uncomfortable either way. So she didn't really pay me any mind. She didn't have a sense of urgency or anything. So I sat in the front of the waiting room for about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes before they took me to another waiting room, which was in the back. At this point, they were like transforming the hospital. So it was a waiting room, I guess, behind the waiting room. And then you had the actual rooms where the doctors were. So I sat back there for about 40 minutes. And I remember I was just like, I'm just going to go to the bathroom and go home. So I went into the bathroom back there. And as I stood up, I was like, either I have so much blood in my pad that it's overflowing or I peed on myself. So I rushed to the bathroom and I pulled down my underwear and the whole entire sack with the baby in it was in my underwear. It was so traumatizing. So I stood there for about 5 minutes trying to figure out what exactly it was. And then when I finally realized what it was, I went ahead and pulled my pants up and went out and asked the nurse if I can get a doctor. And this particular nurse, he wasn't friendly at all. He was just like, everybody here needs a doctor. I was like, well, everybody here doesn't have a baby in their underwear. So I guess him hearing that, he was like, what? So he puts me in a wheelchair, rushes me to the back. So at this point, I'm crying hysterically. Can't really keep it together, can't talk. can barely breathe. So I get in the room and there's another nurse. So she's trying to calm me down and she's asking me what's wrong, what's going on. So all I could say was my baby's in my underwear. And I guess she thought I was overreacting because she told me, just calm down, let me see it. So finally, after I got it together, I let her take it out of my pad and she went to go grab it. And I guess she was so freaked out because it really was the whole entire sack together. She knocked it over. So I went to grab it and it was just literally in my hands. And looking back, it was cool. But at the time it was like, what is happening? So she was so stunned, she just froze. So I said, are you okay? And she went and got this, it was like a pink plastic tub, I guess, where they discard stuff. So she put it in there. And she took it to it's like this little table, I guess, where they transport stuff. So she just kept saying, do you understand what's happening? You're having a miscarriage. And I just remember not being able to respond. So she asked me what I wanted to do with it. And looking back, I wish I would have said that I wanted to keep it, but I didn't even think to keep it. So not thinking, I just told her, just take it. So my boyfriend eventually got there. And when he got there, he was so distraught. The first thing he said was, where'd they take my daughter? He just started crying and then I started crying. And they left us in there for about an hour to just calm down. Then eventually they came back and they literally just checked me and gave me discharge papers and just told me that I had a miscarriage and it looked like everything passed and that I could stay there as long as I wanted, but there's nothing else that they could do. So it was very like, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just like an out of this world experience. And it happened so fast looking back, but in that moment, it just felt like it was just taking forever. So that's how my pregnancy ended.
Wow. You really gave birth. And I always say that birth is birth. A miscarriage is a birth. A stillbirth is still a birth. Any second trimester loss is still a birth. And you literally went through labor and delivery by yourself. Yes. In the hospital seeking help. But the people weren't listening. Like they were not listening to you. They're like, I need to be seen. I'm bleeding. Like, I need help. And man, I just want to honor that you did birth a baby and you birthed the baby on your own and you went through that whole process by yourself. And I want to thank you for sharing that because a lot of people don't hear really the trauma that happens when you birth a baby alone and then to actually physically see it and hold it. A lot of women don't get that opportunity, obviously, especially if they know they've had a chemical pregnancy or a miscarriage. Typically, the doctors schedule a D&C for them and they don't go through the full process. So I want to thank you for sharing that. And I honor you for sharing your experience because I think that it's just something we don't talk about really. What does a miscarriage look like in its live form? So take us back to after they discharge you, did they give you any follow-up to go back to your OBGYN? How were those next few weeks for you?
So the next few weeks, the next month was absolutely, it was terrible. So this happened on December 30th. So the day after was New Year's Eve. So that I didn't want to do anything. This really put I don't want to say a strain on our relationship, but we coped very differently. So I didn't want to go anywhere, whereas he just felt like he needed to go somewhere. So we had this miscommunication as to what each of us needed. So that created a lot of friction in our relationship, and that's something that therapy helped. Going back to work, I tried to go back to work a week after, so I took a week off. So the week that I went back, it was just so difficult. I teach fourth graders, and he comes to my class a lot and brings them donuts and pizza and all types of stuff. So they know him and they know me, and they're always like, when are you guys going to have a baby? So the first day that I went back afterwards, one of the kids was just like, Miss Jackson, you should have a baby. And I just broke down. It was crazy. The principal had to come in, and the nurse had to come try and just get me to breathe, because it was just an absolute struggle. Even being home, getting up, just normal day-to-day things, I just could not do. And it started to really affect, I guess, my self-esteem a little bit, because it was just like, I've done everything. I graduated from grad school. I've done this. I've done that. I'm doing it the right way. So why did this happen to me? So it almost felt like, am I being punished for something? It was just really tough. And then, but prior to my miscarriage, I did already have a therapist. So I had seen her before, just from stress from work and working and going to school full time for both. It just created a lot of stress. So learning how to cope with that. So after my miscarriage, when I went to go see her, she told me that she was pregnant before I could tell her that I had a miscarriage. So immediately the whole aura in the room just changed. And as I began to share my story, I felt like our relationship just wasn't going to work as her being my therapist, because she was kind of like, it was almost as if I was telling my story and she was just like, oh my God, that happened to you? What in the world? Like, it didn't feel like she was trying to help me cope with it. It was more of like, she was shocked, which is understandable. So I did end up getting a new therapist. And I can honestly say that therapy absolutely helped me not only deal with my miscarriage, but also issues that I had prior to the miscarriage that actually came up after the miscarriage, which is interesting. So that will probably describe my month after.
Yes. So thank you for sharing that, because therapy is so important, and it's something that we all have to dust some tools off that we learn in therapy and bring them back up in different stages of our grief and our journey. So obviously this kind of brings us back to where we are today. You know, it's been some months since your loss. How has COVID-19 impacted you? How have you been grieving during this period? You know, because obviously, you know, you're not probably back into the school in a normal sense. You're probably still doing some instructional. But how has it impacted you, your boyfriend, and your family?
It makes me very anxious, more anxious than I was. It's gotten better. I can say after having a miscarriage, I started to become a little bit of a control freak. And talking to my therapist, she basically said that I'm probably just trying to control what it is I can control. And it was to the point where I was trying to control everything, and it was driving me crazy, because the things that I couldn't control, it was just like something has to change or something has to happen. So it took a while for me to just sit still. And ironically, this happened afterwards, because it really forced me to sit still and actually feel, because otherwise I'll probably try to go on throughout my day as if nothing happened. And initially, the first 2 months after, that's what I tried to do. And I would find moments where I'd be fine for like 3 weeks. And then there'll be one day where it's like the world is coming down and he's like, what is wrong? Nothing happened. And even to this day, I have moments that are like that. Like the dog, she peed one day in the house, and her peeing in the house it just made me cry. I was just bawling. And that was the same day as my due date. It was August 1st. And I was already upset because of that. And then she peed, and it was just like, you would have thought the world ended. So the stillness is deafening. But it really does cause you to really think about what it is you want to do. Definitely in the future, as far as planning a family, we've talked about it, but I don't know if I'll ever be fully anxiety free, I guess, because I'm so afraid to go through it again and it happen again. But I'm even more afraid to go through it and not be able to enjoy it, because I'm so, oh my God, what's wrong? Something's wrong. Something's going to happen. Or is that blood on my, I can see it now. So just learning to relax and let things happen. as well as being attentive to what is going on and taking the proper precautions. Some of my friends that are pregnant, they're doing their appointments virtually, which is very interesting. So keeping that in mind, we don't know how long this will last. So if it does, I mean, I already felt, I guess, honestly, having my miscarriage the way that it happened, I felt like the doctors, even though I was there and they were physically seeing me, they weren't seeing me. And even when I got my discharge papers, which I still have, I looked at them the other day, and on it, it said threatened miscarriage. But all the appointments that I went to, they never even mentioned those words, which if they would have mentioned it, I would have at least been prepared, like, oh, this is what's going to happen. But that whole process that day that I went through, I didn't know what was happening. So I would say just being more aware, being okay with feeling. I know sometimes I feel like I get mad at myself because I still feel upset about it. And I feel like it's something that I should let go. But then at moments where I don't feel sad, I feel guilty because it's like I'm going on about my life and my baby's not here. So it's a constant like seesaw. And sometimes I'm just okay. And sometimes it's one extreme or the other. And it's even to the point where if I'm having a good day or a good week, not necessarily, I'm not pregnant now, so a miscarriage wouldn't be possible, but sometimes I'll have thoughts like something's going to happen or something's going to go wrong, just that constant anxiety. But yeah, that's what I would say to that.
Yeah, I think that being still in COVID-19 has allowed a lot of us who are grieving or who have gone through loss sit with our loss in a different manner. For me, I think I was triggered when George Floyd passed away and we saw his untimely murder on video. And I'm just thinking, like Lord, out of all the times in the world where there is racial unrest and civil unrest, it's the time when everyone's still, right? For people to finally take the blinders off their eyes and really understand exactly what we as Black people are going through. But then it made me sit further, go deeper and be like, well, really, truly, how am I grieving? Am I grieving the way that his mom would be grieving because she saw actually physically her son got murdered? Obviously his mom passed on. And then, really, have I truly grieved to the place where I can continue to share and be healed? Mm-hmm. So I think that sitting still has allowed all of us to go a little bit more introspectively and really understand exactly how we're feeling, how we're doing, and what's the next steps on our journey. So I'm happy that you shared that because I think that we all have had some moments of that in this last, 6 months or so with COVID-19. I would love for you to share how you plan to celebrate and honor your baby. It'll be coming up on a year. October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And during this month, we bring awareness to the babies who have gone to heaven far too soon. But also, you mentioned August 1st, which was the due date. Do you plan to celebrate your baby in November? Have you given some thought to that?
So part of the difficulty I had after my miscarriage was the fact that they asked me what I wanted to do with the baby and I didn't respond. And in the month, well, actually from then on, I constantly have thoughts like, what did they do with it? And that has been like the biggest question that I have. And I remember talking to my boyfriend and he's like, well, do you really want to know what they did with it? And I was like, no, I don't think so. So when I had the miscarriage, I talked to my vice principal at my school because I had told her that I was pregnant before I told anybody else other than my boyfriend. And she told me that I should do something to memorialize my pregnancy. That way I could get some kind of closure because even though I knew that the baby was gone, it was still like part of me was just missing. like it had just vanished. So I started thinking about things to do, and I researched a bunch of websites. One of my coworkers, she was pregnant with twins and had a stillbirth. So she gave me some pamphlets that the hospital had given to her. So I read through those, and there's, I think it's a nonprofit called Forget Me Not.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the name of it. So I reached out to them, and they sent me some things, which really helped. And I talked to her about what we wanted to do to memorialize our babies, because I figured we can do it together. Since it's hard to include other people who haven't really experienced it, I found that some people just don't know what to say. So you can't hold it against them, and they won't feel what you feel. Even my boyfriend, sometimes he's like, I could tell that he doesn't understand why I still get as upset as I get. But I also understand that I carried the child, so I have a different connection than what he would have. So what we're thinking about doing is a little garden box, and then putting a ribbon in it, and then well, she knew what she was having, but I didn't know what I was having, so picking a name that was unisex to honor my baby, and then putting it somewhere in my apartment where I can see it, but it's not smack dab in my face like an ultrasound. I did go through a phase where I wanted to throw the ultrasounds away, and then I didn't, and then I did, and then I felt guilty because I did. So that's always a tug of war with me, I find. And I feel like I punish myself sometimes, and I try not to, because there's nothing that I could have done to stop it. So I have those put in a small scrapbook that I can look at when I want to. But I'm looking forward to building my little garden and watching it grow. I feel like something that I could watch change over time and blossom would definitely help.
Yes, I love that. I love watching a garden grow, and I think that would be awesome for you to nurture and love and speak life into, as if you would your baby if he or she was here. So awesome. I love that. I would love for you to share with our listeners and our viewers. So how are you surviving pregnancy loss?
I am surviving pregnancy loss by doing a lot of self-reflection. I can say throughout my pregnancy, miscarriage, and the time after, I have learned so much about myself. One of the biggest, I guess, moments through my whole journey, me and my mom don't have a wonderful relationship. So when I found out that I was pregnant, she had some very unkind words. And I just remember her saying that she hoped that I wouldn't have to choose between my life or my child's life. And those words just stuck with me. And from then till now, we don't really speak at all. But through therapy, I realized that at some point I had to distance myself from her. And it took her speaking negatively about my child for me to actually have a voice and to advocate for myself and say, you're not going to treat me like that. So ironically, me having my baby and going through that experience, it strengthened me to the point where it made it okay for me to tell people how I felt and tell people what I need and demand it whenever I'm being ignored, because who knows, I could have went home and bled out. Anything could have happened because they didn't listen to me. So that was definitely a valuable lesson that came out of a horrible situation. And then another aspect would be talking about it with other people my age. I'm 24, so I'm rather young, so we don't hear about miscarriage or anything like that. And when I was trying to find ways to cope, I remember I got some books, and I'm like, this is just too sad. Like, some of them were just like, I can't sit here and read this. And I ended up finding a podcast called Life After Miscarriage. And I listened to that, and then I found yours, which feature Black women. So after listening to all the stories, I decided to go ahead on my Instagram and share my story. And there were so many of my friends from grammar school, high school, college that had gone through the same thing. And it was so ironic because we're all young. And it's not something that you talk about. When I went to my OBGYN, even though I was high risk, they didn't even mention the chance of a miscarriage. So just not hearing it, I didn't expect it. So I feel like if they would have mentioned it, I could have prepared myself. But I think that was part of what God had in store for me, because I could honestly tell people what it felt like without any type of bias. That is literally what happened, with me not knowing anything at all. So being able to advocate for myself, sharing my story, and not being afraid or ashamed to share it, because there was a period where I was like, I feel like I failed. Like everything in my life, I go for it, I get it. But this, I failed. So that was definitely a struggle. And the last, I guess, big component of me surviving miscarriage would be getting back into journaling and reading my Bible for a long period, from November, when I first started bleeding, all the way until my miscarriage, and probably 3 months after. I was angry with God. I was so upset. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to go. I don't think I went to church for 5 months. And I would talk to my dad, and he would always tell me, just talk to him. Even if you're angry, just talk to him. He knows you're angry. And for the longest, I would just be silent. And then it came to the point where I would tell God that I was angry. And then eventually I began to realize it had to happen for a reason, because there's one of my friends, she has PCOS, and she just had to terminate her pregnancy due to health reasons. So I was able to help her get through that, because I had experienced what I experienced. As unfortunate as it is, I'm grateful for the experience. Hopefully I don't have to experience it again as I continue. But just being able to understand that everything does happen for a reason. When we're going through it, we don't want to hear that. All the people that had, well, you can have another one, or maybe it just wasn't the right time. At the time, I did not want to hear that, because most of those people had their kids, whether they wanted them or they did not want them, or whatever the case was. But looking back and being able to, I guess, accept it, that would probably be the space that I'm in now. I accept what happened. I can understand the beauty in it, because for those 3.5 months, I was the healthiest that I've ever been. I was the happiest that I've ever been. It was a great experience. And then the aftermath, yes, I lost my baby, but I most definitely found myself. So that would probably be my biggest surviving miscarriage moment.
Yes. So where can our viewers and our listeners connect with you after this goes live?
I am on Facebook. It's Regina Janelle, Janelle. And then on Instagram, it's Just Don't Touch with 2 underscores.
All right.
Twitter, but I don't use Twitter. It's just.
But I'll make sure I link everything in the show notes or the description box. But thank you so much, Regina, for sharing your story with us. This has been a blessing. And I know that a lot of people can relate to the experience that you had, especially not being seen, not being heard, and definitely how to advocate for yourself going forward in the future. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. For show notes, go to sistersinloss.com. To stay connected with us and join the Sisters in Loss community and receive my weekly newsletter, please go to sistersinloss.com/newsletter. That is sistersinloss.com/newsletter. Please rate and review this episode, and I will talk to you next week.